koutou katoa, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us here this evening. I'm really excited for tonight's webinar. We're looking at how we can rethink business as usual at secondary schools following the lockdown period. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping matters. The webinar is going to run for around 40 to 45 minutes this evening, and it will be recorded, and we'll be releasing the video later this week. And you will be able to write in questions during the webinar. You just need to use the chat function, which is the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, and we will be monitoring those, and I'll be feeding them into the conversation. So it's my pleasure this evening to be joined by Claire Amos and Louise Addison. Claire is the principal at Albany Senior High School. She also is, and I'm going to have to read this because there are so many things, she's also on the NetSafe Board, the Pike Challenge Advisory Board, Network for Learning Advisory Panel. She's a Google Certified Innovator and is co-founder of Disrupt Ed NZ. She also has said here that she's passionate about family, shoes, tattoos, and leading change in education. And Louise is principal at Edgewater College in Auckland, and she is passionate about developing innovative curriculum that will prepare students to become future innovators, entrepreneurs, and change makers. Louise and Claire, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Nina.
So to start off tonight, I just wanted the two of you to share a little bit about your experiences of the lockdown period, feedback you've had from staff and students about the period, any key lessons emerging from it for you and for your schools. Claire, do you want to kick us off?
Okay, yeah, I'll kick you off. So thank you for having me, Nina, and thanks to everyone who's joined us this evening. Look, I saw this whole period as a massive opportunity for listening and learning, and something that Karen Spencer from Wellington High mentioned early on in lockdown was the concept of noticing, and that it was a real opportunity and period for noticing what was going on for our teachers, for our learners, and for our wider community. So we gathered voice a whole heap during this process. We formally gathered voice at the end of that first week of lockdown, just before we went to the early school holidays. And then we continued to gather voice from our teachers, from our students, and from our community throughout that period. And there were some really key things that we learned throughout that time. And the first one was that it was a mixed bag for students and for teachers. It was complex, tiring, hard work for our teachers. Even though we were a school that had really strong online practice, having to do that real swift pivot and going to full online practice was draining for them. I don't believe any of our teachers had a school holiday. I think there was a whole lot of work done over that period, preparing for the very best experience for our learners. Our learners, it was a mixed bag. There was a mixture of students who were often disengaged in face-to-face class that became more engaged online and really enjoyed the opportunity to join Google Meets and join via Google Classroom. There were those students who found it okay in a mixed bag, and then of course there were those students who really struggled to engage. And I often talked about the experience that I had as a mum at home with two teenagers and seeing the real mixed response that they also had. So I got to see that experience firsthand, where I had, you know, 1 year 10 learner who really enjoyed being online, found it really easy to engage. Another one who really missed the face-to-face interaction she was having with her teachers, and that sort of level of engagement and scaffolding and guidance that a teacher in a classroom can do in an informal way that's not so easy online. So yeah, I think we gathered really diverse voice, and we realized that there were some really key things that we had to learn to do right online if it was going to be effective. But we also learned that there were some aspects of online learning that students loved. And the biggest takeaway we got was they loved the opportunity for a bit more learner agency, and they loved the opportunity for some increased agency and able to be a bit more self-directed in their learning.
And Louise, how about for you at your school?
Yeah, so lots of similarities, but I guess a few differences. For myself personally, it felt like a crash course in decision making under uncertainty, and really you know, that old adage of building your wings as you're flying. Really an overwhelming sense of support as a community. So really everybody kind of got on with the bandwagon quite quickly, from our students to our parents, staff, you know, their willingness to really try and do something completely different. We certainly were not in a strongly online environment prior to going into the lockdown. We were very device and technology. We had lots of access to it, but not really in that online type sense. For me, there's a real parallel between when you're deciding for future focused curriculum. You can't really, it's not really research that you've got to look to, or evidence-based decisions or proof. Quite hard for me to say as a maths teacher around that, but you just kind of have to go with your best hunch and then keep asking. So as you're going through, I was really pleasantly surprised at the student voice engagement that we got. We did 2 different surveys, and also of our parents and also of our staff. Prior to going in lockdown, we already made some pretty key decisions. We decided we were not going to go synchronous. Certainly, I think about 10% of our learners had no internet access, and only about a quarter had good device access, meaning their own that they could use for learning. Lots of shared devices and devices that weren't necessarily going to enable that to happen. So we didn't attempt to do a school day during the school day at all. We attempted to identify what was the really meaningful learning that we wanted to happen, what's the key concepts that we want them to have developed over the year, so taking that long-term approach, and just taking out that busy work, doing our best to try and keep some connections wherever we could, and just sort of having a weekly schedule. So those were sort of pre-decisions that we made. I guess I'll get it out of the way. In hindsight, knowing what to come, I would have gone and bought a device for every student on the first day, had I thought of it. About a quarter of our students still didn't have devices even by the end of the lockdown. Our big goal was we were going to do 80% wellbeing, 19% learning, and 1% assessment. That's that maths teacher coming back probably. And that was our sort of catch cry. So whenever we felt like things were getting too much, and that's also acknowledging the staff who were in an incredibly different situation, you know, with their families, with many really challenging things happening at home. We didn't try to sort of broadcast into all of the homes of our students, but to just have multiple ways so they could get it by email, by text, by a phone call, by a spreadsheet. And we had lots of offline learning tasks as well as online learning tasks for those that were able to engage. But we really sent the message and trusted our parents. They were the ones that were best able to judge what learning their students were capable of, depending on what was happening. And similar to Claire, so we had about a third. A third absolutely loved learning at home, loved the learning environment, the comfort, you know, really, I guess, in keeping with their culture. They loved interacting with their parents and siblings and the chance to talk about their learning, and that, you know, and the same for their caregivers and whoever was in the home. About a third kind of did some and dipped in and dipped out, and a third reported liking nothing about learning at home and just were so desperate to come back. Yeah, we had about 10% not engage at all in learning, and we just took that from the positive viewpoint of they were focusing on their well-being and what that looked like at that time. And once we had them back, we could focus, you know, start from wherever it is they were at, and about a half were able to keep up with most or all of the learning that was being set. Yeah.
Really interesting, thank you. So now obviously we're 2 weeks and 1 day into life after lockdown and being back physically at school. What have the last couple of weeks been like for both of you and for your schools?
Well, I think for us, the initial thing was there was a real sense of celebration. We had massive turnout on the first day back. I think we had something like a 93%, which is higher than usual for us as a senior school, attendance rate. And there was a real sense of celebration and, as twee as it sounds, joy to be back in the physical spaces with each other. And I think that was really positive. It has waned a bit over the last 2 weeks, and I think the reality of the fact that people are finding quite overwhelming. We're an open plan school, you know, you've got nearly 1,000 students. Some people found it overwhelming to be back in those crowds. I think all of us, teachers included, have found it overwhelming, the pace of real life. I don't know about you guys, but I discovered I really liked having a cup of tea in my dressing gown and checking my emails till about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then being able to manage my workload and have a walk in the afternoon. I mean, the pace of, you know, being in a school and getting up when you have to get up and lasting the distance for the whole day, and now that it's wintry and it being quite dark when we get home, I think there is a sense of, you know, now we've got over the excitement of being back in real life, that we're finding it challenging and exhausting. And, you know, we're going through the question now of how do we reset? How do we be realistic? Because we want to continue to look after our teacher wellbeing, after our student wellbeing. And we're trying to find that sweet spot, which is, you know, still having high expectations of our learners, but also saying, actually, let's be realistic. If you're in level 1 or level 2 and you know you're going to come back to school next year, let's not flagellate ourselves in trying to get the, you know, the full 60, 80 credits that you need to get the certificate. Let's be realistic about what that target looks like. So it's been a real mixture of joy, and then I think the reality of just how tiring, you know, we've been through a crisis. You know, this is not normal life. And the fact that it's been a really exhausting experience has caught up with us. And people are doing well, but they're working hard. And I get the sense that these last, 5 weeks of term are going to be hard graft for our learners and for our teachers. I don't think we should underestimate that.
Yeah, you're repeating themes that a number of people have mentioned to me over the last little while. How about
I certainly wrote down joy too. So I think that is a common theme. But for us, a real sense of calm. So prior to us coming back and through the alert level 3, there was quite a lot of anxiety from staff as well as from students about what it was going to look like, how it was going to all work. And so lots of work in sort of putting in systems and reassurance and routines, and this is how it's going to work, so that people could kind of pre-prepare. Certainly for teachers who are parents with their students, with their children, going back to school and managing all of that, which, you know, if you've got kids in your bubble, you'll know that's been quite fun. But overwhelmingly, our 2 weeks has been calm. And I have to say, the frantic, fast-paced decision of the lockdown for me has now been, I've just had a bit of a chance to sort of have a breath. The ease of face-to-face communication versus trying to do everything online and written and get it, you know, so that anybody can read it and interpret it no matter how, versus actually be able to see their face when you're talking to them and know what they're saying. Our really big decision prior to lockdown was to go to 3 sessions a day. So we knew we didn't want to try and we were doing 5 traditional hour periods a day, and we knew we didn't want to do that during lockdown. So during the holidays, we rewrote our whole timetable to be 3. They were going to be 90-minute sessions once we got back to school, but they were however long you wanted them to be at lockdown time. And we put in 3 self-directed studies for our seniors. So a day, or 20% of their time, was completely their choice as to what they were working on. And we right from then started communicating to staff that that's what we were going to do for term 2. So we didn't know how long the lockdown was going to be. We didn't know how that would look, but we were saying, look, and actually quite early on, staff were saying to me, oh, can we keep doing this? So, you know, we had a bit of buy-in that way. So that's what we've done. So we are 3 90-minute lessons a day. We have 2 self-directed studies for all our seniors. The 3rd one is when we have professional learning as a staff, so it's kind of a home learning type thing. There was a lot of, I think, nervousness around what that was going to look like. And I think if it wasn't in these circumstances, and I'd said to staff next term we're going to that, it would have been an interesting, different case. The overwhelming feedback I'm getting now is even from those that had real worries, they're just seeing the being able to breathe. So maximum of 3 classes to focus on in a day. Their concerns about students not being able, not engaging and not being able to interact in that 90 minutes. We're doing, lots of conversations and sharing best practice in PLD to really keep growing that. And 1 week before we came out of lockdown, we decided to go for one-to-one devices, which we'd never been before. So, yeah, we didn't know how many devices. We tried surveying, we didn't really know how many were out there. We knew how many potentially we might get from the ministry. They haven't all arrived yet, but they're still coming through, which is really exciting for us. If we hadn't got those potentially up to 150 devices there, we would never have been able to do it. So we 10% bring their own and we supply the other 90%. And that has just been so, it's just cool. You walk around and, for those of you teaching, the horror of booking the computer room and getting there and then this bit doesn't work, or you book the cow and then you get them there and they haven't been charged and they take 20 minutes to log in and all of those fun things of technology, just really completely shifting that to the student's own device. And really all our decision making was, okay, we're going to have a mentor time at the beginning and end of each day to hand them out and collect them back in, and you've got a lockable cupboard in your classroom. And that's all we did, really. So all of the seniors already all have a device, and we're just waiting on the other ones to come in, and the ministry to release a few leases. If anyone's out there, do it for us, please. We've been begging. And then, because we've got some devices sitting there that can't go out yet without the leases, but yeah, we're going to be one-to-one across the entire school. So awesome. And that really helps with the 90-minute session, because you can really have different tasks going on. It gives you lots of affordances around choice. And the 2 biggest bits of feedback from the students that they loved is flexibility, choice, and in particular the choice was about when and pace. So them being able to work at their own pace. And those were the things that we've really tried to put in. We had a slippers Friday in the first week where we all wore our slippers. Yep. And to inspire that theme of how we're going to bring the best of at-home learning with the best of at-school learning. Our sweet spot, Claire, is we're imagining a Venn diagram. So we've got at-home learning, we've got distance learning, and then we've got our school values, which for us are our 3 MCs. So we have Maya, Manaakitanga and Manawareka, or care, courage and curiosity. So we want to build those in. So our sweet spot is those 3 things all combined.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And Louise, it's really interesting what you say about changing the timetable, because actually I had a couple of people send me questions before this, and a lot of the common themes coming through were around timetable. And I think one of the things that a lot of teachers have realized going through the period of teaching online and distance teaching at home was that they didn't always like the strict nature of a lot of school timetables, and what you talked about, the lack of flexibility there. So I think really interesting step to immediately transition into that new 90-minute block of teaching in 3 classes a day.
We've had a really big conversation about acting your way into a new way of thinking instead of thinking your way into a new way of acting. I think if we had tried to plan it and really thought about all of the things and the pros and cons, I mean, maybe we might not have done it, but many teachers just from giving it a go, and I've talked to teachers at other schools have gone, oh, wouldn't be that happy if they tried to do that. But staff are coming up to me all the time saying, I was really nervous about this. I wasn't sure about, what was going to happen. There is less teaching time in the traditional sense. They've gone from 4 hours to 3 hours a week. So it's 2 sessions plus the self-directed study that the students are getting to choose what learning area they focus on for that. But, you know, the 2 big things teachers would say, they're really making the most of those 90 minutes. They're able to get much more done in that 90 minutes than the equivalent of 1.5 lessons. And we're also really seeing the sort of tyranny of the 1-hour timetable. So the art teacher talking about they would extend their research out to be an hour because they couldn't set up all the art gear as well as do the research. So even though the research only had to take 20 minutes, they'd make it fit an hour and then cram the doing creative stuff into the next hour. Whereas now with the 90 minutes, they can do either or. And with the devices, they've got a lot of flexibility in terms of students being at different places and different spaces as they're doing that. Plus, you never teach 2 in a row. So you've always got a break before your next students come in. And I think in terms of that wellbeing piece, at most seeing 3 classes during a day, there is a breathing sort of process in that, instead of, you know, your 5-period day where you're seeing 150 students and trying to get round them all and feeling that sort of sense of time pressure. It seems like that has been another bonus.
Yeah, and it's funny because actually I was lucky enough to come into a school which had those foundations already, and that Albany's long had 300-minute blocks with a morning tea and a lunchtime in between. And we've been pretty close to one-to-one. And I think for us, it was trying to take fuller advantage of what we had already. And I guess for us, our biggest shift and change has to consciously think about how we use part of the week for more direct instruction and more structured teaching and learning, and part of the week for more consciously supporting learner agency and supporting self-directed learning. So we're lucky enough to already be in that space where we have the 3-period timetable already one-to-one. Our students do their 5 subjects on a Monday and Tuesday, and then they repeat them again on a Thursday and Friday. So probably our biggest shift has been to take what we were doing in lockdown, which is encouraging our teachers to frame up learning and do their direct instruction in the first part of the week, and then allow the students to carry on with their learning in a more self-directed in the second half of the week, and be available for more one-on-one group support mechanisms. And it was quite interesting because that was quite easy for teachers to adopt in their online environment. Now that we've come back into the school environment, we've actually had to manage that much more carefully, because teachers were eager to get back to making the most of all of the time they had with their students, and feeling like maybe they needed to, you know, be running practicals and engaging in more direct instruction in both the beginning and the second half of the week. So we've decided to take a really slow and careful approach to formalising that way of being with our students. And it's really good because what it's allowing us to do is, in a sense, talk about what good teaching and learning looks like in the first place, i.e. the concept of learning design, the concept of students being really clear about what they're learning, why they're learning, and what their next steps are. But you can't do the self-directed stuff without that stuff being in place in the first place. So we're now in the process of going through 3 phases of developing learner agency through supporting self-directed learning, and we're in phase 1 at the moment. So phase 1 looks like on a Monday and Tuesday. At the moment, all of our students stay in their classes right throughout the week. So they're in their timetable spaces with their timetable teachers all week long. In the first part of the week, the focus for the teachers is direct instruction, is framing up the learning for the week, doing that really hands-on stuff that unpacks what the student should be trying to achieve throughout the course of the week. In the second half of the week, on the Thursday and Friday in phase 1, it's simply thinking about how they can encourage their students to be more agentic and more self-directed within the context of their classroom, within their classroom space. So simply supporting them to get on with group work, to carry on with their assessments, to work through a range of learning activities. And that's you know, encouraging our teachers to be really explicit and making that stuff available still on their Google Classrooms, even though they're still in the school space. And once we feel people are feeling a little more confident in that space, we're going to go into phase 2, and that's where we talk about emerging self-direction. And that's where we encourage the teachers to do the same at the beginning part of the week. But in the second part of the week, be open to negotiating what the students are working on, even though they're with them in their classroom, in their timetable. It might be having conversations about how they best use their time. So we have tutorials on a Tuesday morning and a Thursday morning for 100 minutes, which is their homeroom, pastoral sort of space and time. And on a Thursday morning, there's a really clear focus on their tutor working with them to prioritise and plan their Thursday and Friday, and think about the planning tools they might use, think about how they're going to unpack their learning, how they're going to problem solve, do all of that stuff. And in phase 2, the only difference is that we're encouraging the teachers to be more open about what the students are doing within their class time. So they might be able to negotiate, say, I'm up to, you know, I'm more than up to date with my maths. I really need some extra time to work on my English. Do you mind if I do that? So it's in partnership with the teacher at every phase and stage, but the students have a little bit more ownership of prioritising and choosing what they work on. At some point this year, and it's really important to note that between each phase, we're having really conscious, careful check and reflect phases. So capturing student voice, capturing teacher voice, getting a sense of what's working for them, what isn't, what do we need to be mindful of, what can we do better to support in the next phase. Phase 3, I think, is where we get to the really exciting opportunities. And that's where on Monday and Tuesday, we still have really clear timetable time. Students are with their teachers in their classes, framing up their learning for the week. But on the Thursday and Friday, they'll check in with their subject teacher, classroom teacher, so they can take the role. And then they might be able to say, but I'm heading off to a science workshop, or I'm heading off to a maths workshop. And we can make the most of our open plan spaces and the idea that we might have zones that they could go to, get the support they need and work. There's some problem solving to be done before we get into that phase. And for the sake of taking our community with us and our teachers with us and our students with us, we're not rushing into that phase. We're going to step our way through it. And we're only going to step into that version of self-directed learning if we're confident that the students are equipped and are feeling confident about managing their time and understand that whatever they do is done in negotiation and partnership with their students and with their teachers. That if teachers are feeling confident about this and not feeling like they've lost control completely, and that they can see the opportunity and the advantages, and that our community understands what it is and what it isn't. So they're not seeing it as a free-for-all and free range. They're seeing it as a really carefully constructed opportunity for increased learner agency, self-direction that happens in partnership with the teachers. So, you know, I'm like you, Louise. I think had we decided to bring this in as an initiative this year, everyone would have rolled their eyes and go, oh, for Christ's sakes, Claire's trying to, you know, make more changes. Whereas I think what they have seen is the opportunity for what could be through lockdown, and they saw how much it benefited students to have a bit more agency and ownership of their learning. But also what we've been presented with students coming back is no two students are in the same place. And so our need to personalise and give them greater ownership is a decision that's made for us. And to that end, we're having a what we call our virtual refocusing hui. So in week 9 and 10, we're pushing out invites to all of our family and whānau to make a time with the tutor teacher, and we're actually going to do it via Google Meet to make it more flexible for everyone. And that's going to be an opportunity for the student, the tutor, and the family and whānau to consciously renegotiate their personal academic targets this year. I refuse for my students, for our learners, for our teachers, to be going to look at nonsense national targets around level 1 and level 2 NCA. I want all of our learners and teachers and community thinking about what does that young person actually need, and based on whether they're coming back next year or not, and how can we ensure they get what they need not a predetermined, stupid percentage of kids getting level 1 or level 2. I just think we've got to look after these young people. We've got to make sure that we're actually looking after their well-being, actually meeting their very real needs, not our perceived ideas around arbitrary targets.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just going beyond all your questions, ain't we?
Oh, I love it.
Flowing through.
I didn't expect anything less from you, Claire. I think lots of questions coming up about the ideas that you've been raising. I think sort of to look at bringing a few of them together, there are some questions around the ability of students to be agentic and to be able to self-direct their learning, and how you actually support them through that process, particularly with year 9s and 10s. Claire, I realise that you don't have year 9s and 10s in your school, but Louise, you do. So some thinking around how you're managing that process. Some questions around whether the 90-minute period is potentially more effective for building strong relationships between teachers and students and facilitating that process. And there were a couple of questions also around, I think particularly for you, Claire, where you have your Thursdays and Fridays with the move towards more flexible timing, whether the students will have to always be physically on the school site during that time as well. So I don't know how the two of you want to divide up those questions and address those.
I can probably talk a little bit to some of the junior stuff. And I think the big innovation isn't necessarily the 90-minute session. It's what we are choosing to put into there. So one of the things you might know about Edgewater, we have an Edge innovation program. So for certain classes, instead of learning their English, Maths, Science and Social Studies in those courses, they do problem solving, community action, creative design and future studies. That's their 4 core subjects. So they're used to having integration and team teaching. That's one of the big things that we want to put more opportunities in, because where there is that team teaching and that shared responsibility for those learners together and the ability to discuss them and their learning, I think that's been really powerful. Part of our Edge program has a focus on bicultural capabilities. So rather than just focusing on, I guess, the Te Ao Pākehā future-focused creativity, critical thinking, character, citizenship, we've got sitting along those some related but not translations from Te Ao Māori. So, you know, what does rangatiratanga look like alongside the idea of character? And that's one of the big things I've been thinking about lately, that learner agency, and whether it sits in an individual, if you actually rethink about that as, say, rangatiratanga or self-determination and a collective ambition rather than an individual. I wonder if that's something more that we want to grow, rather than you yourself are going to be agentic, but you as a team or a group or a collaboration or a community working together. In terms of the self-directed learning, we are going to put some tutorial times in there as well, so that will be opt-in and opt-out for learners. So that's where we're thinking around that piece.
Yeah, and I think in terms of how we're preparing and supporting our students to become more agentic, we're sort of approaching it from all sorts of angles. There's the two sides of the coin in terms of the teacher and the student. So we're working really carefully with our teachers about how they design learning that supports learner agency, i.e. Being really explicit about learning outcomes, next steps, their learning design on Google Classroom, and making sure that's available 24/7. We're weaving in principles of universal design for learning and making sure that agency choice is a big part of that's been a focus of ours anyway for the last 2 years, as has the concept of assess when ready. So we've got a really clear expectation that teachers should be open to negotiating the mode by which students get assessed where possible, but also be open to negotiating readiness. So not when the student wants to be assessed, but when they're ready to be assessed. So that's the teacher part of the equation. And then we're also working with our students and explicitly teaching them tools and strategies that support learner agency, such as through their tutorials, we're teaching them, they're looking at different planning tools like comparing Trello to Kanban, to how they can use their Google Calendar, the concept of chunking, prioritizing, but also we'll be moving into things around problem solving and communicating with their teachers and getting support when they need it. So that's part of the play. So there's sort of like the how you're supporting and teaching the teachers to design learning that supports learner agency, how you're supporting and teaching the students the tools and strategies that support their learner agency. We're looking at it through the specialist sublet lens in terms of how we design learning, but we're also looking at it through the tutorial lens and how we design a curriculum that supports and unpacks that as well. So, you know, our specialist subject leaders, who are our HODs, are consciously designing for that and working with their teachers. Our community leaders who work with our tutors are consciously designing the curriculum in our tutorials and how we can unpack that. You know, none of this happens by accident. You know, I often see the misconception that self-directed learning is teachers hands off. I would argue that it's far more complex for a teacher to design learning in a self-directed environment than just standing up and regurgitating stuff and doing direct instruction, because there's you know, there's a certain level of sophistication in terms of thinking about how do we design this so students know how to get from A to B to C, and how do they recognise their levels of success. I'm lucky enough to have Kay Hawke from the education group as my appraiser, and I was having a really big yarn to her about our plans, and one of the things we talked about is the power. One of the next steps for me as a school leader, I see myself very much as a leader of learning first and foremost, so I'm really hands-on in all of this work with my senior leadership team. I want to design a really clear rubric that shows what the next, all the different levels of agency look like from a student perspective, but also looking across and saying what are the different aspects of agency, you know, planning, chunking, you know, problem solving. What do they look like at each step of the ladder? And you know, I love that work that I've done in the past with Pam Hook and Solo Taxonomy, and creating those rubrics and those matrices that help our students to identify where they're at and how they get to the next step in the agency journey. So I do think you need to carefully design for this in terms of your support mechanisms and your strategies. You had a question about would our students be allowed to go off-site on a Thursday and Friday? A future possibility. One thing I'm really mindful of, I've considered myself a change leader. It's what I love doing. And one of my biggest learnings early on is that you have to take community with you. And so a big part of that has been really clearly communicating what we're doing, what it is and what it isn't. And it's also making sure that what we do is done in a really slow and staged manner, and that there isn't risk for our students to fall through the cracks. So, you know, in my dream of all dreams, the walls of our school would be permeable, kids would come and go, but that's my head. That's not where our community's at, it's not where our students at, it's not where our teachers at, and it's really important that you take brave steps, but you take them with really clear sort of boundaries and supports around them, because you know, I've already had parents go, yeah, but you know, my son or daughter can stay home on a Thursday and Friday, can't they? And I've actually had to say, no, actually, I'm not willing to compromise community trust in what we're doing by letting one or two parents have their kids stay home on a Thursday and Friday, because I want the message really clear that attendance matters. I want all of our young people at school. They need to be here engaging in their learning. So at this stage, no, that flexibility doesn't exist. Could it exist next year or the year after when we're feeling really confident? Come back to me then, absolutely. But we need to take everyone with us, and we need to feel really confident that it's the right thing to do.
And I'm just noting the time, and we are very quickly coming to the end of our 45 minutes. But to finish off, I was just wondering whether given us lots of food for thought, and I know, judging by the comments coming in, there are lots of people who are really interested in some of the ideas that you've been sharing this evening. But I wondered if we could end with both of you reflecting on changes you would like to see, or that this period may prompt in education in New Zealand more broadly. So not just within your own schools, but also thinking beyond them as well.
One of the, I'm sure you've all seen on Facebook, the support New Zealand made and New Zealand local. I want to support our local schools, stop this absolute rubbish myth about good schools and bad schools, and really have schools be community hubs, like many have been. You know, they have been feeding their communities during this time, and, you know, working really closely. I've actually in some ways felt closer to students and to parents because they've directly contacted me, whereas they might have gone through some other people in the past. Yeah, so really getting some good partnerships going, and actually seeing the local school as being, you know, your school of first choice. We need more flexibility. This is around contact hours, and let's think about a 4-day week. And accountability for learning, not attendance. That's sort of a big thing I've been playing around. You cannot deny equity has been significantly exacerbated or worsened in this environment, and that's not between schools, but that's within schools. I reckon we need to do an audit of inequity and have a look at what's really happening around learning spaces and staffing and access to technology. And I want some more joined up thinking. I'm going to say all these things. I want some more joined up thinking, which actually links across mental health services, and Keith's just laughing your head off, learning support, rangatamariki, social workers, ESOL provision. I'd love a student allowance to keep students in school from 16 to 19 so they don't go out to work, because that is absolutely real and what is happening. That was our grandparents' generation that left school at 14 to support their families, and that is happening now in many of our communities. And I want NCA to catch up. I think I've said enough.
Woohoo! I echo Louise all the way. I think we've got to close the goddamn digital divide. I think we need to be realistic about what our locus of control is as schools and school leaders. We can certainly help our communities, but it is not within our power to close the economic divide. We can certainly support our communities with that. We can close the digital divide. You know, I got really cross when I saw a few school leaders who should know better jumping up and down about their lack of, you know, having been leaders for a long time in their schools, and jumping up and down about the lack of devices and lack of connectedness. You know, we have it within our powers. We need the ministry to support us in doing this. We need to make sure that every young person has access to a device, but it's not just about digital devices, it's about digital literacy, and that they understand how to use it. It's sort of boring, but having those tools and mechanisms, like Louise has talked about, having one-to-one devices and what a game changer that is for this school, and what it then enables. Like, I am passionate about universal design for learning and about education being absolutely inclusive. It is really only possible to do that sustainably if every single child has access to a device, has access to reliable Wi-Fi at home, and that our teachers, our students and our families are digitally literate. And then we can use that as foundations to build a lot of really important stuff on top of that.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you both. Lots of really powerful ideas and challenges for us all who are involved in education, for thinking about what we can do moving forward to address some of the challenges that you've raised. So I just want to thank you both so much for talking with me this evening and sharing what's been happening in your schools and what you've been doing and what you've been thinking about. You have definitely given us lots of things to think about, lots of really interesting and potentially challenging ideas coming through there. But I think overall it's quite an exciting time potentially for education in New Zealand. And it's rare that we get an opportunity to really completely rethink the way that we do things, and to see that there are new possibilities out there. So it's a great challenge to all our educators to think about what we can do differently. So thank you both so much, and thank you to everyone who joined us here this evening.
Thanks for having us, Nina.
Thank you. My final message to staff was we're going to bite off more than we can chew and then chew it.
Brilliant. And I think that's a wonderful way to end the session this evening. Thank you.